Professor Golstein, President Putin began his remarks expressing gratitude to all the servicemen who are fighting international terrorism. And of course, the speech came so close to two terrible disasters for the country: the shoot down of a Russian bomber by Turkey and the crash of a Russian passenger plane in Egypt. Some are calling this speech more emotional. Would you agree the tone was, in fact, more emotional?
Yeah, his tone was emotional, but the substance of it was rather skillful, calculated, and rational. What he tried to do with his speech is to connect the past and the present. He referred to Russian losses from Chechen terrorists in the 90s, and he connected them to the present. He said, you know, Turkey and Syria, these are the places who harbor terrorists who did some damage to Russia before. So we are in this war where, you know, dealing with some losses, but this is our war. We're defending our borders, we're defending our people. So that's how, you know, he more or less conveyed to a lot of Russian people. Many of them understand what he is doing in Syria and in Turkey and so on, but many of them wonder. But he connected it with very painful Russian experience of very unpleasant terrorist attacks in Moscow, in Budyonnovsk, in Ossetia, in airport in Domodedovo. So he says that these are the same people we're fighting. We're at the forefront of that. So he kind of, you know, brought it to Russian attention that, you know, this is a very immediate and necessary fight.
A number of digs at Turkey, and of course we have to talk about the ongoing spat. Putin warned they will regret shooting down this warplane, and I'm quoting here, "We will remind them of what they did more than once. They will regret it. We know what to do." Is that a threat?
It was very forceful delivery. I think whether it's I think it sounds like a threat because he insisted, you know, that Erdogan shouldn't hope just that it will be only economic sanctions. As he put it, said it's not going to be over the tomatoes. There'll be something else. But he also insisted that we're not the type to rattle the sabers. We know what to do. We are not against Turkish people. We know there is a particular group of Turkish leaders who sort of try to produce some kind of division. And it doesn't sound like a threat, but he usually doesn't throw the words around. So I'm sure he'll come up with some kind of ways to sort of penalize the ruling elite in Turkey, who for some reason are pushing for this conflict. And Putin was also very specific. He used these expressions from ancient Greeks, from Seneca: whomever God wants to punish takes away their reason. So he referred, instead of God, he referred to Allah and said, I don't know why Allah is doing it, but obviously the Turkish leadership is not quite reasonable. So he was very forceful about that.
And you mentioned that he even hinted Russia may do more in addition to slapping economic sanctions against Turkey. Any idea what the next step is going to be for Moscow in this ongoing dispute with Turkey?
It's very hard to say. I think he will definitely insist that now every plane will be accompanied by the fighters, that, you know, Russian planes are not going to be threatened over there. You know, whether he'll push further and start, say, arming Kurds, or I really don't know. It's hard to say. But he will make sure, and this is the message he wants to convey to armed forces, to Russian people whose children, boys and girls are fighting there, that he'll make sure that Russian armed forces will be protected. And again, he insists that this is the war to defend Russia, that Russia went through that, Russia has been attacked by terrorists, and he wants to make sure to prevent it. And he was also very specific when he said, I know who stands behind it. We have to work against terrorism together, and if those who sort of want to join us should join us, and avoid just empty declarations.
And what do you make of these very serious allegations leveled against Turkey's leadership? Putin accusing them of buying stolen oil from ISIL, and Moscow says it has evidence.
I don't think he'll be throwing it just around without evidence. You know, there is a lot of oil. ISIS gets money from this oil, and it has to be sold. And there are various reports that it goes to Turkey, then it's sort of being sold to all over the world, including Israel. I didn't trace it. I don't know how to trace it, but I suspect that Putin has enough evidence to support his claim. That's absolutely clear to me.
And Professor, are you concerned this ongoing dispute with Turkey will undermine any future cooperation, if you will, between Russia and the West?
It's an interesting question. I suspect that the West will have to do something. There is enough public pressure coming from the public to do something about ISIS and about their kind of violence and so on. So the West will, they will have to find common ground, and I suspect that Turkey will be told to sort of to follow the line. I don't think it will be, Turkey will be this bone of contention which will split the alliance. I think too much at stake, especially public opinion of the Western powers. Russia, in that sense, appears like a victim of this bombing, and at the same time as an active force of trying to accomplish something. So my feeling is that the West wouldn't gamble with just blind support of Turkey and pushing Russia much further. I think it's going to be very naive and silly.
What about his comments about the economy? It was actually the third subject in his speech. He mentioned sanctions. He again condemned corruption, referring to sanctions, retarded economy as difficult but not critical. Would you say most Russians agree with that assessment?
I think he addressed the issues which every Russian feels. Obviously the imports are becoming more expensive with a weak ruble, and everyone in Russia feels the squeeze. My feeling is he addressed it very successfully. What he said is that government is behind all these industries, all the enterprises which want to substitute the export business. Any enterprise which wants to produce something to replace the products lost to sanctions will be government supported. He also stressed another interesting dimension. He said we have a lot of partners. We not necessarily have to trade with the West. He insisted on expanding toward the East. He talked about countries in the East, from Vietnam to China. He started talking about Russian Far East, how the roads, infrastructure, everything else should be built up. So I think it was, I don't know, of course it depends how much he will accomplish, but it was a very nimble and sophisticated and realistic speech, trying to utilize Russian strengths and trying to sort of minimize Russian weaknesses. But I think what was very interesting and concrete is his orientation toward the East and toward the new trading partners who will easily substitute lost trading partners in the West.
And finally, Professor Golstein, any surprises in the speech for you?
I didn't hear any surprises. I was very much impressed by that. Of course, certain things Russians always talk about: fight with corruption, transparency in the politics, transparency in the legal system. He addressed it because it's obviously there is a concern. But I don't know how successful will he be. But he also addressed, and it was pleasant to hear, that he wants to do something with demographics. He wants to continue to support families who give birth to more children. He insisted that Russian demographic is actually improving, that average lifespan now is 71 years old. It was less before. I was also much impressed by his quotation of great Russian thinkers and writers. He quoted a Russian historian Karamzin of 19th century, who insisted that Russians have to know their value. They shouldn't brag about themselves, but they should know where they're coming from and their achievements and their strength. That was very wonderful. I was impressed that he quoted Dmitry Mendeleev, great scientist, who insisted strength of Russia in its unity, in its cooperation, and its ability to rely on inner resources. So I think it was altogether it was successful, down to earth, and sophisticated speech.
We'll leave it at that. Thank you so much, Professor Vladimir Golstein, Associate Professor of Slavic Studies at Brown University. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.